Shop Talk Live, episode number 213, this time with 100% more Vic Teslin. That's right, Vic joins Mike and me, and we discuss making wooden hand planes, any telltale signs of bad boards in the lumberyard, whether you really should shoot your miters or just take them off the saw, and what one listener should do with a plethora of number 4s. First, I want to let you guys know about some fun stuff that we've been doing on the website in this isolation period. I know some of you are stuck home with kids, wondering what to do, little kids, older kids, whatever. Head on over to findwoodworking.com/kids, and we have assembled a collection of posts and projects and all sorts of things that you could do with your little ones out in the wood shop to get a little bit of shop time and to get them off the iPad for a minute. So my son and I did a live stream going over a bunch of projects. It was really fun. And then we've also been posting lots of other projects that you can do with your kids. So head on over to findwoodworking.com/kids and get in the shop with your little ones. All right. Here is Vic, Mike, and myself after a brief word from one of our sponsors. For more than 90 years, Woodcraft has been supplying woodworkers with quality tools, supplies, and advice. For the best in hand tools, power tools, and shop essentials, you can count on Woodcraft from start to finish. Check them out for woodworking classes, free demos, and project advice from knowledgeable, friendly staff. With 75 stores nationwide, you can find a store in your neighborhood or shop woodcraft.com for your favorite woodworking brands. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work since 1928. So I'm here with, remotely with Mike Pekovich.
Hey.
Vic Teslin.
Hey, how's it going?
And Jeff Rose, of course.
Hello.
Right on,
Jeff, thank you for all of the hard work you've been putting into making all of this happen behind the scenes and keeping us rolling.
Okay, you're welcome.
So I didn't send this out earlier because I want to surprise you with it. So we have a prelude question from John. When Mike or other well-known woodworkers, such as Bob Van Dyke, walk into a woodworking store, are they treated like celebrities? And we have Vic on, so come on.
This really needs to be addressed to Vic.
I know for me, running into Mike, Bob, or perhaps Christian Bexford on a Saturday at my favorite woodworking store would be like running into Tiger Woods at a golf shop. Surely, others who read Fine Woodworking and have become acquainted with these experts by watching the project videos have similar reactions, right? So I've been in a woodcraft with Bob, and it doesn't happen because his school is next to a woodcraft. So there's definitely no aura about Bob being in a woodcraft.
Well, there is an aura around Bob. It's just not one conducive to people going up and talking to him.
Do you guys ever get looks in woodworking?
Vic, you ever been like recognized in public?
A few times, yeah, and then once I pay them the money I owe them, everything's okay. But yeah, you get that a little bit, but it's still very disconcerting when somebody kind of calls out your name and you don't know who they are, because you immediately start to think, oh my goodness, should I know this person? And
do I owe them money?
Do I owe them money or anything? So yeah, it's kind of it's interesting. It's always a little bit. I still find it very disconcerting, and I certainly don't consider myself a celebrity, because I mean that's not what I'm just a woodworker, man.
I remember being starstruck when the first time I saw you at Vic at it was at Woodworking in America in 2015, maybe in Kansas City. And you were walking down the hall, and I was like, "Oh my god!
Look at the size of them!"
And you were wearing the Studley suspenders
that George or Don Williams made for me. Yeah,
Williams. Yeah. And I was like, "Oh, you got those from Don?" You're like, "Yeah, cool, isn't it?" I was like, "Holy crap,
that's awesome!" I find the whole thing kind of weird. Yeah, I find it weird. It's anyway, it's just not something that I look for or I'm interested in or anything like that. It's just, I do what I do because I really enjoy it, and and if I can kind of put any information out there that, might help somebody or save somebody from screwing something up that I've screwed up 100 times before, then I do it. But yeah, it's I mean, it's a nice feeling. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I still have an ego, but yeah, it's a little strange. What about you, Mike? You must get recognized a lot more because you teach a lot more than I do.
Not really. Probably like the one story that comes to mind is, Ben, this is maybe before you came to the magazine. A bunch of us were eating at Panera down the street.
No, that was my first day.
There.
That was my first
3 or 4 of us
day.
were at a table eating, and a woman comes up and says something like, "Do you guys work at Fine Woodworking?" And we said, "Yeah." And she points to her table and her husband sitting there sheepishly and says, "My husband really likes you guys." So I think he ended up coming over and we said hi and everything. I don't know, Ben. So how many years ago was that? Because I think that's about it.
It was about 4.5. Yeah, so I thought, oh, this is like I'm having lunch with famous people every day now.
Yes.
It hasn't happened since.
Yes.
But it was like that was my first day, so it was like this is my life now.
It's interesting. I went to a guitar making conference with Linda Manzer, and if you don't know who Linda Manzer is, just Google her and you'll see some pretty incredible work. She's probably one of the best in the world, guitar maker. And I went to a conference with her. And I was just going to kind of check it out, and she's a good friend of mine. So I went to this conference, and I'm walking through these rooms, and the room like quiets, and then you hear people whispering, "Oh my God, it's Linda Manzer! It's Linda Manzer!" And I'm like, "Holy cow, Linda, you're a rock star!" And she's like, "Only here, Vic." So it's just funny. She's pretty meek about it, but yeah, like everybody just stopped talking. It was like Leopold,
All right, let's answer some woodworking questions. All right, question number 1 is from Connor. I recently bought a hardware kit to build a wooden plane. I'm wondering what angle I should set the blade at for minimal tear out and ease of push.
That's interesting.
So
there's no answer to that question.
It's when you've got that 2-part question.
Yeah,
the balance, right?
The Japanese have taught us that the lower the angle you can get away with, the better.
When you're plating cedar.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in general purpose, like if you can get away with a 45-degree blade, cutting angle on a piece of cherry, then of course do that.
Uh-huh.
In my other life, I did a lot of like kind of work looking at different angles and how they affect things. And I think a truly sharp blade, not just a sharp blade, but a truly sharp blade and a tight mouth opening takes you a lot further than a blade angle does.
I agree.
Now that's my opinion. And so I think, 45 degrees is kind of the standard that, has been, thanks to Stanley, everybody uses a 45-degree blade.
Right.
You could bump that up to 50 if you were concerned. Sometimes in like a wood like cherry or whatever, if you get a little bit of that sort of fleck, you could end up getting a little bit of tear out. And the 50 is not going to give you any hassle in pushing.
Right.
55, you're going to start to feel it a little bit more. And then, but I always, because I use a sort of bevel up system, I always try to go with as low a blade presentation as I can to start, because every piece of cherry is different. And like if I can put a 25-degree blade in a bevel up plane and, try it at, whatever that works out to be 37 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
That was fast math, eh?
That was good.
Yeah, it's not bad. Anyway.
25 plus 12 is
that's
tough,
right.
I'll
Yeah,
tell you.
yeah. It's like metric that way. See, you just add the whole numbers. I thought I'd sneak that in. But anyway, so if I can get away with 37 degrees on a piece of cherry, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Right. But if I start to see a little bit of tear out or a little bit of whatever, then I'll just switch to a higher angle blade and then go for it. But on a wooden plane, I mean, they're wooden planes, so they're pretty cheap, right? The hardware kit is really quite inexpensive, and a chunk of wood is inexpensive.
Right.
So make 2 or 3 of them, and have one set up at 40, one at 50, one at You could even do one at 60 for, extremely cantankerous woods, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever make a hand plane in your Cronovian days, Mike?
Yeah, I've made a couple. I have just the regular, like the flat body, the traditional crenot blade. I'm sure that's bedded at 45 degrees, but I remember when I was making them, it seemed that a lot of people tended to bed them a little bit higher. And a lot of the English infill planes were bedded higher, like the York pitch, I believe, is like a 50-degree bed angle. So that was kind of traditional for hardwoods and stuff. I have a Lee Nielsen 4.5 that I put a 55-degree frog in, hoping I could get better results on quarter sawn oak, which can be really prone to tear out. It didn't work that well, so I put like a 10-degree back bevel on that. So that's basically a 65.5-degree presentation. And with the blade super wide, it's really hard to push, so I never use it. And when you do, it makes this kind of horrible scraping feeling. It feels like it's nothing but tear out, but the surface is super, super smooth. But you almost bruise the palm. I do kind of bruise the palm of my hand if I'm using that too much, so I don't use it. But in a rare occasion, it works well. But the bottom line is, just pull out a scraper, because I mean, that's like, 90-degree presentation, you're getting zero tear out. So for me, while a higher angle can help, I typically go from, if my regular 45-degree plane doesn't work, I usually jump straight to a scraper and then, bite the bullet and do a little bit more sanding that way. But if, like Vic said, if you're making a wooden hand plane, make a few of them, because I think it's sort of like ukuleles. Like, if you make 5, that 5th one is probably going to be better than the first one. So you may as well go for it. So.
Because if you're dumb enough to do one, you might as well do a bunch.
I actually have 2 ukuleles, 3 of them, but I've not built any of them myself. So that's the next step.
Oh, there it is.
Nice. It just comes flying out.
This is the joy of working by yourself, home alone. Now you can just play a ukulele whenever you want. Have you ever made a bevel up wooden hand?
So I've tried. It's difficult when you consider how thin the material is at the bottom, like by the mouth. It's pretty difficult to do. So I've been making a lot of different planes lately, as a lot of people will soon see. But the
coming
to your neck. Anyway, and I was promised a cover, by the way. So
you got it.
I'm hoping that happens.
We'll make one for you.
You'll get it. I mean, we send the magazines out to
PDF
cover.
But anyway, so those planes are a little bit lower angle, but to try to get down to the requisite 12-degree bedding angle, I think you'd be hard pressed. I've tried it a few times with different woods, and then I thought, I wonder if you could do it with Baltic birch, just to kind of have the integrity of that. But and then maybe put a skin of hardwood on the bottom sole, and I thought, I don't know. I don't think it's worth it, to be honest.
What about just taking like a big heavy iron, like from a bevel up plane, and just throwing that in a wooden plane with a 45-degree bed, so you've got that kicked up to like 65 degrees right off the bat. So then you're at a super high angle. Yeah,
that's what his name just flew out of my head. The fella that makes the planes in Australia,
H&T
Gordon. Yeah. Basically his planes are designed to be bevel down, but then if you get into some cantankerous grain, you can flip the blade over.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now you lose your mouth opening,
all right,
but then the mouth opening becomes less of an issue because you're scraping now. So I don't know exactly. I own a couple of his planes, but to be honest, I can't tell you what the angles are, whether it's a 45 bed, but it's basically like you're saying, Mike, he makes it so that you just flip the blade over and then you've got a scraping tool. So, and it works well.
So there's no chip breaker to have to contend with on something like that?
No, he just uses a single iron on most of his planes that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so Connor, I didn't send this to you either, but when I was assembling the script, I thought there was a second part to his question, and I thought we could quickly answer it. I also have a question regarding French polishing. When I store the rubbers in an airtight jar, the base of the rubber that comes into contact with the wood has started to become moldy. Am I doing something wrong, or is this normal? I've never had this. Mike?
Yeah, you might be doing something wrong, but if you are, I'm doing the same thing. I thought my problem was that I kept all of my shellac rags in an old pickle jar, and I thought maybe I didn't clean it up enough, and everything turned black because of that. Because Bob Van Dyke, he does the same thing, and all of his little shellac rags are in this little jar, and everything is super pristine and right. So I think, like, the big difference between Bob and I is I work with a lot of white oak, and my thought is it's possible that the tannins in the oak are reacting to maybe the water content in the shellac, because there's no such thing as alcohol which doesn't have a water content. I think it's more of a chemical reaction to the tannins making those spots as it is like a true mold. That's what I'm going to say.
That's interesting. So mine, I looked at my little shellac rag. I have a hard time calling it a rubber, let alone what George Frank used to call it back in the 80s. They could have some weird names for French polishing. But,
they do.
I don't have any mold on mine, and it's been going for 3 months.
Yeah.
But that was all on spruce and cherry, so low tannin content woods. So maybe
So Connor, if you're working a lot with oak, I'm going to say that's probably the problem.
Yeah, I've never had the mold problem either. In fact, I've had a rubber in the jar for a number of months, and it's not a problem.
There you go.
Cool. All right. Question number 2 is from Dennis. Do you have any tips for the lumberyard to help single out troubled boards? Quarter sawn white oak is not cheap to just throw away, and our winters in Southern California are not cold enough to burn 14 board foot. So he had a whole bunch of he's building, I believe, your tool cabinet, Mike, and he had a bunch of wood go wonky on him, basically. I don't have much to offer him because normally you are there with me at the lumberyard.
So that's what you need. You need to get Mike Vikovich to come to you. You need to have him come to your lumberyard and pick your wood out with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vic, what are you looking for? I think the answer is probably going to be pretty consistent.
Yeah. I mean, you got to just, and it's almost hard to perceive, but I mean, it comes from, picking out a lot of boards and seeing what's going to cause problems, but you can actually see if a board is going to cause you any grief, like if it has any weird sort of wows in them or whatever. I don't often, well, I mean, anywhere that I shop for wood, they don't care if I pick apart the pile as long as I put it back. But, so, I mean, I'm just looking for the straightest grain, especially in the case of like a quarter sawn white oak. I don't want it running out. I don't want the grain making any like funny jogs along the lines, because as soon as you see that, that's stress that the tree kind of grew under. And as soon as you, like, if it's a piece of 8/4 and you bust that open for a couple of 1-inch pieces, it's going to go crazy on you. The other thing actually has less to do with picking and more to do with handling. And I think that, if depending on the lumberyard, different moisture contents, different lumberyards are going to have things, whether it's stored inside or outside. If you take something that was stored outside, bring it into your shop, crack it open, like right then and there, I mean, you're just begging for it. You're begging for problems. So, the whole acclimating the wood to your shop environment and bringing it in there slowly, depending on how things go. I mean, a moisture meter is a great thing to have. I mean, they could be a little bit dear if you get the ones that don't have the pins on them, the sort of the ones that use magic. Well, I mean, I don't understand how it works, though. That's magic.
I'll never know.
Yeah. So, but I think that's what it is. I mean, I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, exactly. I think grain is everything. And you're right. If you find a little potato chip board, if it's already wonky, you're never going to get that flat, because as you try to flatten it, it's just going to keep on moving. And then it's grain, like you said, the grain in relation to the edges of the board, because If you're cutting a straight board out of a crooked tree in that grain, there's a lot of run out. It's going to be a mess when you start to mill that. So super straight grain. On plain sawn boards where you have the cathedrals on the face, if you have a really pronounced cathedral, it means the grain is running at a pretty strong angle in relation to the face of the board. So don't pull anything with really heavy cathedrals. What I'm looking for, like the ideal plain sawn board, is where the grain is pretty straight on the edges, but also down that center strip where it's super plain sawn, is if it's fairly straight or you see these little circles or islands going down, that means that grain is really, really parallel to that surface. That's a really good indicator that that was a straight board cut out of a straight tree, and that's going to behave pretty well for you. And like Vic said, if you're ripping down thick stock 8/4 stock into thinner boards and it's been commercially kiln dried, you're going to have to anticipate there's going to be some movement when you do that, and just, account for a lot more material loss than you think you might have. You cannot rip a 2-inch wide board in half and get 2 1-inch wide pieces. You're actually lucky if you can get 2, full 3/4 inch boards. So out of 2-inch, yeah. Just if you really account for a lot of loss, then things are going to end up pretty straight. And if you're really trying to sneak as much yield as you can, it's going to bite you. It's going to go crooked, and you're going to lose a lot more wood trying to increase the yield than just being a little bit more conservative with it. So, yeah,
Are there any species that you worry about more than others? Like a long time ago, I was doing something and I wanted really, really pale wood, and I found a piece in the poplar pile. It was a piece of like pure sapwood that was just white as can be, and I grabbed it, and I've never had anything move as much as this board did. It was a haunted board. So I always like when I'm looking at poplar now, I keep sapwood away from it. But are there any things that you're hesitant to buy because of movement?
I don't avoid anything personally. I think that some woods are more prone to movement. Like I find sugar maple, Acer saccharin. I find it can be a little bit unpredictable. But again, I think it has more to, like Mike was suggesting, it has more to do with paying attention to the grain and what it's doing. But I don't know. Do you have any species, Mike, that you avoid?
Ben, you mentioned poplar, and it's super cheap. And I've had, those boards really turn into bananas really quick. So I did a kitchen where I did poplar door frames, and they tended up not staying all that flat. So I would, on something like that, I would go with like a soft maple. I think that can be more stable. Also has to do with how the lumber is dried. Like white oak, I think can be really reactive when you're sawing it, because I think it's one of those woods that you really should dry for a really long time and dry it slowly. But I think they fast track it, and it really creates a lot of internal tensions. Where I was working with some air dried walnut, which was like 12/4 stock, and I was ripping 1/8 inch like basically veneers off of that for some internal dividers, and it was just dead flat, and you could just feel when it fell off, that little thing, that veneer fell off the side of the bandsaw, it just fell over. There's no tension. But if you're trying to, if you're resawing 8/4 oak, you're probably over 2 feet and you're cutting a 1/2 inch wide board, you can get anywhere from an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch cup there. And if you're trying to flatten that out, you're ending up with not a lot of stock left. So,
so that's a really good point. Do as many short resaws as possible.
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb is always, when you're milling stock, is always break it down as small as you can before you do any final milling to it. Like, if you're getting door frames, 2-inch wide door frames, you don't want to mill up a 10-inch wide board flat and square and then trying to rip your door frames out of it. It never works.
Yeah.
Just cut them, 2¼ 2½ inch wide off of the rough stock and mill down each length of frame as much as you can. And if you can get by leaving it longer before cutting it into shorter lengths, that's okay. But if you do want to get rid of a lot of, cup along the length, if you can cut those parts down, it's, maybe leave them an inch over length before you start flattening and reduce as much of the cup as you can, you're going to save more lumber that way.
All right, so let's talk about our all-time favorite techniques of all time for this week. Anybody want to volunteer to go first?
Go for it, Vic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I completely forgot. I got to think of something real quick.
I can go.
Okay, Ben, you go ahead.
Okay. And nobody pay attention to me, so you're thinking about your own techniques.
I'm good. I thought of one, so I'm going to go ahead and listen.
Vic has leaned back and okay, so mine it's really, really simple, and I'm pretty sure I've done it before, but it's worth repeating. Always store your wooden hand screws in the same position. So I keep mine the top handle on the left. So every time I grab a wooden hand screw, the orientation of the hand screw is always the same, and I can operate it without having to think. It gives me a consistency. Otherwise, trying to operate wooden hand screws without this one method of consistency is infuriating for me.
Oh.
That's interesting. I usually just end up turning it the wrong way 3 times.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's like a USB, right? It's like
That's exactly what it's like.
It's a quantum theory thing where, if you're wrong the first time, wrong the second time, right the third time. It's the only way that works.
Yeah. That's really actually kind of cool that you've come up with a solution to that, though, Ben. I think. Oh, well, whatever. You could have taken. He doesn't listen to this.
I'm the same way. You pick it up, you turn it wrong way, turn it the other way, good. And even if I try to anticipate, okay, I would normally do it this way. That's wrong. I'm going to do it this way. This will be right. Wrong way. Do it the other way. So it's one of those things. I will not even try to guess what's right. I will just pick a way, and it'll be wrong, and that's okay. And just go to it. So Ben, you got these oriented. So tell me how this works for you.
Okay, so there's 2 handles, one a top handle and a bottom handle, we'll call them. I always hold, and it doesn't matter which one you do as long as you're consistent. I always hold the top handle in my left hand. So when I spin it,
nearest you.
If they're oriented standing up, I'm looking at it standing up. The top handle, or the handle furthest away from me, is in my left hand.
Okay. Right.
So when you spin it like a bicycle going forward, it tightens. When you pedal backwards, it loosens.
Okay.
And it's always, and so when I put them on my rack, they're always in the same orientation, left side, or top one on the left. And I pick it up, I go. And the best part of it is when you don't have to think about how to use a wooden hand screw, you use them a lot more often, as opposed to just when you need to use a wooden hand screw.
Do you zero them out every time you put them back?
So right now, the way I have them stored is I have a...
You mean so that they're parallel?
Well, zero and closed.
Oh, okay.
They're not closed. Okay. I have them mounted right now. There's a piece of 3/4 inch plywood mounted vertically to my shop wall. So the bottom one of each size has to clamp onto that plywood. Those are the only ones that I have to think about. But I have a wooden hand screw buying problem, so I don't get to the bottom very often. So
awesome.
All right.
Cool.
I bought you enough time.
Yeah.
Who's Vic?
Technique. It's sort of a technique and a tool all at once.
That's fine.
I really have, now that I've been making a lot of planes lately, and I've really enjoyed using a float to keep surfaces flat and be able to remove material very judiciously. And so I think it started to creep into mortise and tenon work. where instead of using a hand plane, let's say, to, whichever one you would use, sometimes a shoulder plane, sometimes a rabbet block plane. But I've been grabbing a float and then just taking a paring cut off with the float. I find it remarkably easy to keep the surface nice and flat. And you're removing a very, very small amount of material with that float.
Explain what a float is, because this isn't a tool a lot of people have experience with.
Yeah, so a float is basically it looks like a file, generally fairly thick, and then it just has a series of cuts in the material, basically making full width knives that go across the width of the tool, and it removes wood, and it does it really well. And of course, the float has to be sharp. And there's ways to make sure that happens. And the first way is to buy a good one, because you don't want to be messing around with it. But yeah, they just and they make them in different sort of setups. So some floats have the face is cutting, but the edges are safe. Some the edges are cutting and the faces are safe. There's different shapes. So for plane making, some of them are sort of diamond shaped at the end, and others are, up on their edge. There's a whole bunch of different. Some are offset. Some of them have like kind of a dog leg in them. But so the technique portion of that is really just being able to judiciously remove material, and not using a hand plane. I don't know that it's easier or better or anything. I've been using them a lot, and I've been finding that I'm grabbing them more often than not.
That's cool.
What brand floats do you have? Because historically they've been hard to come by, but I think people are starting to manufacture them again now.
Yeah. The ones that I have, I think they're made in Japan.
Oh, okay.
And so, but not like from a guy up in a cave somewhere, and they're $6,000 each. They're like they're mass produced.
Yeah.
They look an awful lot like. Does anybody remember the Nicholson shear cut files? Like they were just a flat file, and they had a very similar pattern that these Japanese ones have.
Okay.
And they come in a plane set, like for making planes, and then a regular set, and then they also have a half round where the round is. So, and they cut. They're extremely sharp, and they leave an incredible surface behind as well. So, for shaping tasks as well, I find that. Yep.
When would you grab for a float over a file or a rasp?
Well, if we're talking about shaping, I find rasps are pretty crude tools. They can remove a lot of material quickly, although a lot of times people don't buy them with a heavy enough cut. But I find that these floats can be really aggressive if you want them to be, or you can kind of just very lightly use them, and they can do nice work. I find the nice thing about the float is that because it's more like a series of chisel cuts versus like, kind of tearing the wood, you get a much nicer surface out of them. So if you don't want to have to do a whole bunch of subsequent, going to the second file and then going to sandpaper, if you want to try to get it right off of a tool, then floats can be pretty handy.
Cool. Really cool.
So that was more of an all-time favorite tool, not technique.
That was educational.
It started technique and then went into tool because we didn't know what the heck you were talking about. That's all.
Right. Well, there you go. So yeah, it's just one of those things that's kind of affected the way I've been working lately, and it just I don't know. I don't know if it's. Like I said, I don't think it's better or worse or anything else. I'm sure, you could get into all kinds of crazy arguments about, well, how do you keep the surface flat and all that other stuff? And I don't know. I just do.
Woodworkers never do.
I don't know how what's that get on to?
Crazy arguments about esoteric things.
Oh, don't even get me started. I just got a new set of Japanese chisels, like a good set of Japanese chisels. And somebody recommended I go on to a Facebook group. to figure out how to set the hoops properly.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
What chisels did you get? Do you know the maker?
Ouchi.
Okay.
They're these ones here.
Oh, nice. First thing is get that sticker off of there, man.
Oh no, I love that.
Just soak all that lacquer off of there and get the sticker off.
Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna be scraping the wood, and there's lacquer on the metal as well, so I'm gonna get all that off. But
I can't believe that they let you in that group because you have a Tormek.
Oh well, I said that too. Well, after I got 40 responses of information I actually wasn't looking for, I said, "Well, thanks so much for all of your comments. Like anything in woodworking, you don't have to ask for an opinion to get one." And I said, just wait till you guys find out that I sharpen with a Tormek, and then left it at that.
I was going to say, my advice, step 1, sharpen with a hollow grind on a Tormek. Step 2, use a honing guide to put your final bevel on there.
Yeah.
And they will go nuts. It's awesome.
Oh, no, it's going to be fantastic. I'm actually going to shoot a video on doing it and then watch their heads come apart. But the biggest issue that they had was whether or not I should hammer the handle to reduce its size to put the hoop on versus using a hand plane to reduce the size to get the hoop set. So
I use this scraper is usually enough.
Yeah.
And I don't like to pre-compress it. You just want to get rid of any ridge on there that keeps the hoop from fully seating.
Right.
And then I just get a socket wrench thing, just a little bit.
They sent me one of these.
What is that?
It's a hoop setter.
The hoop setter.
So you can set your hoop with that. Yeah. I don't know which part you use to set your hoop, but
should be the hollow part. Yeah,
right in there. So
it should be wide enough to get around the handle, but it should contact that hoop and just knock it on down there. So
you got it.
Make sure you epoxy that in place.
Officially the point where we've gone.
Yeah, I think we've got. This is one of those situations where this is turned into a forum post.
Yeah.
And
we did an article with John Reed Fox on kind of choosing and setting up Japanese chisels. That's my go-to information right there.
How long ago?
2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, I'll go find it.
Yeah, go find that. It's super good.
I'll post a link.
Oh, there you go. Hey.
There you go.
All right.
Sorry to hijack
Mike, what you got?
Yeah.
No. Have you come up?
Kind of a twofold thing, but they both kind of spawn from the same situation. Basically, the overall technique is measuring what Steve Latta calls it, like measuring in the field. Basically, for certain dimensions, you can take them off a plan. Beyond that, other dimensions, you need to take them off of the assembled piece as you're working on it. So in this case, I'm doing a little, it's like a case on stand. I'm working on the stand. So there's side rails that butt into the legs, which is simple enough. But then there are kind of supports that run front to back, but those butt into the front and back rails. So at a different shoulder to shoulder dimension than the side rails, which are leg to leg. And if you were trying to do that by math, and try to hit those, you'll never get them. So it's a notion of you do the side rails first, butt into the legs, dry fit everything, and then I just measure rail to rail to get that shoulder to shoulder dimension for my supports that run front to back. So that's kind of the first half, and that's a really awesome basic tip. But then while I had this thing dry fit, in terms of locating those case supports, they're attached to the front and back with through double tenons. So basically, where they attach and the distance between those tenons and the size of those tenons, that becomes a really prominent graphic element on the front rail of that piece. So while I had it dry fit before I figured out where they were going, I just cut little rectangles of wood to approximate the size of the tenon sticking through the leg and trim them at about 1/16 of an inch thick, which is the amount that they're going to protrude. And I just put double stick tape on the back of those, and I could just put those on that front rail, just like I would mocking up drawer pull locations or something like that. So I was able to get sort of like the side to side dimensions of these by where those tenons were going to go, and then also the space between the tenons, because if you've ever done double tenons on a rail, it looks wonky if they're too far apart and too close to the edges, and if they're too close to the center, that looks really wonky too. Like, you know right away exactly what that's going to be. So it was just using these little faux tenon stickers on the front of the rail to dial in, which seems like a really important structural component, which it is, but because it manifests itself in such a graphic way in the piece, it became almost as much of a visual concern as like a structural concern, because, you know, within a few inch range, it doesn't matter where those supports are, they're going to support the case just fine. And the double tenons, you know, again, they could be off but still be really strong, but just to kind of, it's that notion of kind of combining the consideration for structural elements in a piece as well as how they manifest themselves as visual elements in the piece. So stickers, that's it.
I'm going to write that down as peel and stick tenons.
Yes.
You know what, Mike? That's really interesting because I did a table a number of years ago that had a through tenon as well, through an apron and a floating top and all that other fun stuff. But the thing I found, the tendency for people, I think, is to simply trying to draw it on paper and see how it looks.
Right.
And I think that's where you know, your comment about doing it in place, in situ, is important, because it may look okay on paper, but then when you're standing at the height that you are,
exactly,
with the piece standing at the height that it is, it's like putting a pull on a drawer. It never goes in the center, does it?
No, you got to kick that up a little bit. Yeah,
you got to kick it up a bit, or else it's going to look wrong. And so this is even more important because, like you said, that is a huge visual impact. And if you get it wrong, that's all you will ever see
forever,
and forever. And you
point
exactly
out
point out to everybody, because nobody, I mean, who's going to tell Mike Pekovich he screwed it up?
You'd be surprised. Yes.
Instagram.
But yeah, no, that's a really good technique, is like, I've done it before with tape, just to kind of locate things. But man, I'm totally using that, because not only do you get to see the projection, or sorry, the location, but you also see the projection.
Absolutely. And what you were saying about only getting a certain information working from a front view, because the other thing I was looking at is that on the sides, I have the tenons, through tenons, you know, sticking out on the sides of the legs too. So being able to look at that as from a 3/4 view, and you see the placement and size of those tenons on the front rail in relation to the tenons on the legs. Yeah, it gives you a much better understanding of what it's going to look like once you do it. And for me, that's a key to design, is give yourself a chance to see it before you actually start to cut mortises and tenons and drill the wood. Because half of it is, cutting a mortise and tenon well. The other half is getting it in the right place. And it's a tough combination. Yeah. I'm still working on it.
Cool.
Right on. All right, so we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. $10 a month. $10 a month is all it takes to get a subscription to the magazine, full access to the website, including all of our video workshops, like Mike Pekovich's that's airing right now, and Chris Gochner's and Matt Wada, and some epic videos that go further in depth than anything you're going to find on YouTube. I truly believe the Fine Woodworking Unlimited membership is stone cold the best deal in online woodworking education. So get the subscription to the magazine, get it delivered to your door, and get access to the finest video series that you're going to find on the web. Also, you get access to the complete online archive, which is every issue of Fine Woodworking magazine that's ever been published. All 281 of them at this point. So head on over to the website, click on members, and start your 14-day free trial. If you like it, it's $9.99 a month or $99.99 a year. I'll come right out and say it's $100. But it's the best $100 you'll ever spend towards becoming a better woodworker. All right, question number 3 is from Bob. All right. In Shop Talk Live at number 81, Ed's favorite had to do with making a saw hook for cutting miters. His process had to do with coming up with a shooting board that would cut perfect angles. Matt said not worry about cutting the angles perfect, but to use a shooting board. In Shop Talk Live 204, an entirely different cast, advised not to shoot your miters, but to cut them at the correct angle. Am I missing something?
Scandal.
So 204 was Tom, Mike, and Barry, not involved. 81 was released in 2015.
I was there too, though.
Oh, okay. Fine.
So,
The tie.
No, it's all different situations. What Matt Kinney was talking about was that if you have a saw hook to cut 45, who cares if you're off a degree, because he's going to fine tune that 45 degree cut with a shooting board and a hand plane and really dial that in, which is great. And then he takes really good care. Like, let's say he's making a box. The important thing isn't the exact length of each side of the box. It's just that the opposite sides are exactly the same length to each other. So who cares if it's plus or minus 3 inches, as long as they're exactly the same length. So when he's shooting his miters, it's pretty easy to take a pair of pieces as you're shooting them and taking passes and sort of hold them up to each other to make sure that there's end to end you're right on. And then you just do it with the other pair. And then sort of, as long as those pairs are the same, once you glue up the box, it's going to be a rectangle or a perfect square, not sort of a funky thing. So that's why that's a good thing. What I was referring to is when you're cutting miters on a table saw, like by machine method. So I'm doing a picture frame or a box on the table saw, and I have my stop set up and my angles. And if those angles are off and you start to shoot those pieces and you start to change the length of those pieces as you're changing the angle, and you're starting doing this in a random fashion, you're having to keep track of the angles and the length of those parts. And it just becomes something that you're chasing over and over, especially if you're trying to cut parts to an exact length. And as you start to correct those and they start to change their lengths, you could end up with something physically square, but not in the dimension you're talking to. Mm-hmm. So when I set up my miters on the table saw, I take great care to dial in the exact angle, cut 4 pieces, tape them together, make sure that my joints are really, really square, and then set all my stops so that I'm exact off of, I don't know what Vic is doing. And then make sure that it's exact off the machine. So I'm getting parts exactly the same length to the exact angle I can. So they're 2 different concepts. And I think the problem is, for instance, I'm doing these little teeny tiny boxes where the walls are only maybe 3/16 of an inch thick. And I'm starting by cutting those ends just square at 90 degrees and shooting them square. And that works because I'm kind of doing it by hand. And like Matt does, I can check my dimensions off of each other, and it works really well. It's like when you kind of, cross-contaminate your processes from machine to hand work and get stuck in the middle, I think that's where you run into problems. So all of the advice that was given is all good, but you can take really good advice and combine it in such a way that you end up with a bad result. And that's what we're responsible for like 40 years of magazine making, is we offer so many good options that can be combined in so many bad ways that,
it's true.
We can't help but build misinformation into the information just by presenting different methodologies and philosophies to get to that same product. So yeah, sorry about that. They're all right, but yeah, they cannot work for you. If you start to, the main thing is have an understanding of what you're after and how you're going about doing it. And then that's going to lead towards processes that work for you, as opposed to mixing and matching. You take anything from sharpening to cutting joinery. Well, someone says to do this, someone says to do this. So I'm taking half of this and half of this. You can run into trouble there.
Well, I think, Mike, you hit it on the head when you said that, difference between hand and power tool. I mean, I use the shooting board technique if I'm cutting my miters with a handsaw, and I will purposefully leave myself, a 1/16 of an inch to be able to play with and finesse and get everything ready to go. But if I'm going to use, like I've got a little Incra table saw, the one with the mortising on it, attachment on it. And
until I buy it.
Right, exactly. I'm saving it for you, Ben.
I know.
But the nice thing about it is it's like super accurate, and it's got like awesome stops built into it and all that other stuff. If I'm going to cut a miter using the table saw, well, then I'm not going to go near that with a hand plane, because I'm going to let the saw do what the saw does, and that's create parts that are, the right length, the right angle, and I will take, like you said, that fussy 10, 15 minutes to set it up so that it's perfect. And I don't want to have to touch it again. But I mean, a lot of times I'll just, if I'm working at my bench and I got to cut a board to length, like, using a referential measurement, I'll just put it on the saw hook, cut it, shoot it, and then it's done. I don't have to worry about it. But multiples, especially miters, like, I mean, I avoid miters at all costs because they are probably, in my opinion, the fussiest joint that you can try to do.
Yes.
And it's just a butt joint. I mean, like everybody frets about cutting dovetails or mortise and tenon by hand. I would take any of those in a heartbeat before I would touch a miter.
Yes.
So I just, my advice is don't cut miters.
I agree. Yeah, I like that.
So I think that there's this belief that you need to touch every surface with a hand plane to make it good enough eventually. Because if you're gonna rip a board to width, you're gonna hit it with a hand plane before you edge glue it.
Or
right?
If I can get good edges off my jointer, I'll glue it up. So.
Okay. But generally, people are talking about hitting it with a hand plane. I mean,
if you do, okay, you better get set up, because you can take a long time trying to dial in a joint where two boards come together flat by hand. That's its own thing, and it's great. And when I do it, and I do it successfully, I kind of do my dance around the shop, and I'm super happy about it. But honestly, if I mark my X and O on the boards and hit them against the joiner, and even if the fence is off, as long as the right surfaces are out or against the fence and they come in together, and I can trust that they're going to glue up, flat, irregardless of how that angle is. That's easier. But if I can't get there, then definitely the hand tools, you have to go to this. So I think, to your point, Ben, I would say that you don't have to hit every surface with a hand plane, but you should hit every surface with a hand plane that you need to. So a lot of machine work you have to follow up with hand work. So I don't think that, and I've said this, you can do every single thing in woodworking with only hand tools. You cannot do everything in woodworking with only machines. So even if you have your machine work down, you have to introduce hand tools at some point at some stage of the game to do the work to a certain level. Fortunately, it's not absolutely everything. And the miters are a good thing. If we can get that dead on off a table saw, awesome. If I can get my tenon dead on at the table saw, I'm good. If I have to get it to fit, I'll do it. But let those machines do what they do, and then do what you need to do with the hand tools after that.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially when you're talking about mortise and tenon, like if you're cutting the mortise with a machine and then cutting the tenon with a machine, then you can control how that fit happens very easily. However, if you're working hand tools only and you've cut those mortises with a chisel, right now you can't depend on the consistency anymore. So now you want to oversize your tenon and thin it down and make each one fit individually, because they are individuals. They're no longer the same. So again, it's totally about how you work, whether you're using a machine technique or you're using a hand technique. But I mean, having every surface touched with a plane, I mean, that's nice and it's romantic and it makes you feel nice. But I think the reality is that it just doesn't, it's not necessary. I agree with Mike. If you get it off the joiner, if you get it off of the power joiner, then great. I mean, you can make the argument, I guess, that because it's a cylindrical cutter and it's going to leave ripples in the board, how do you get two rippled surfaces to come together well? I mean, personally, I still will shoot it with a hand plane, but I have got myself to the point where I only allow one pass. Because as soon as you take subsequent passes on a joint, like on an edge like that, you are destroying everything the machine was going to give you, which was the accuracy and the squareness. If I can get away with one pass in order to get all of those ripple marks off and then not touch it again, that's what I'm after. But I mean, otherwise, I think that's probably just me being, overcautious or worried about something that probably doesn't matter. But I'm sure we can start a forum thread on it.
All right, let's quickly hit question number 4 from Andrew. I'm a hobbyist still learning how to master hand tools. I have a block plane and number 7 and in between 4 number 4s. I started with 2 number 4s that I inherited and somehow they've multiplied.
As they are wont to do.
You're not supposed to leave next to each other. All planes are sharp, flat, and rust-free. My question is, to expand the range of what I can do with my planes, should I grind and hone some of the number 4 blades to different angles, or should I keep my favorite number 4 and acquire a couple of other size planes? I have a joiner and a planer, so I don't really rely on hand tools exclusively, but I like to go to them when I can.
That's interesting.
So, a wealth of 4s.
Yeah,
what are we doing
with 4s?
What are you doing with all those, Vic?
All the 4s. Well, I don't know. I think, I'd be tempted to set them all up differently. I mean, that's what I would do. If I would sell them. I would keep the ones that that I would need and then go from there. But I mean, you could do things like, now he says that he's got a jointer and a thickness planer. So like my initial thought before I heard that was to convert one into a scrub.
The old scrub plane.
The old scrub plane. That's perfect use for an old Stanley is, put that heavy camber on there and then use it as a scrubber.
Yeah.
And then, you can do things like you could have one with a 10-degree back bevel on it that, is, or you could put a replacement iron in one, like a Hawk or a Veritas replacement iron. And then what you end up doing is like you set that one up for your fine plane and then leave the Stanley blade in another one. And that's more of a coarse plane.
Right.
But I don't know. I used to like have a whole like fleet of smoothers. And now I've really only got kind of 2 that I use all the time, like a small bevel up smoother and a well, no, that's not true. I got a couple of wooden ones, but the wooden ones are all sort of, they're not because I need them. They're because I have a problem. I enjoy making tools. I enjoy making hand planes. They're a lot of fun to me. But I would, set them up for different purposes. I mean, you don't leave them all the same way. I mean, that way you can grab the one you want.
I just had the thought, does anyone make a tooth plane iron for number 4s?
I've seen them for the bevel up. I've seen them
for, bevel ups and stuff, but...
Yeah, typically you don't use a tooth plane and bevel down because the bevel down plane, you can apply a pretty heavy camber and remove material. The whole point of the tooth blade is to be able to take a heavier cut without kind of wrecking the wood or, that sort of thing. But I mean, I suppose you could do with I don't even know if you could do it with a file, I don't think, because that's pretty hard. Maybe.
Yeah, it was just a thought.
If you wanted to like get into prepping veneer surfaces with a tooth. No, never mind. Forget that. Just use modern adhesive and you'll be okay.
Patrick Edwards.
Yeah, hey, listen, that's cool, man. I get it. Like, I mean, if you're using hide glue, then I totally... toothing of surface is legit. But I mean, if I'm using, like a cold press, like I typically use a Type Bond cold press for any veneer work, and I've never ever had problems with it coming up or anything like that. So especially if then you encase that piece in an epoxy pour, I find that that really makes sure it doesn't go anywhere, and it seems to be the hot thing right now. So we could all,
And it seems like there are more and more inclusions being added to epoxy pours these days. And it just brings to mind this toilet seat my grandma had back in the 60s.
Oh, I want to know where this is going.
Oh, man. And it was like clear, whatever, lucite, but embedded. There's beach sand, there's seashells, there's pennies in there.
How cool
I think there might have been like the Las Vegas logo in there. So I don't know.
That should have been a given.
Yes. So, which is not a bad thing, but it's just starting to get a little bit too close in reference the more stuff I see and stuff. But anyway.
All right. So besides your grandmother's toilet seat, what are you doing with a bunch of number 4s?
I think I'm a lot like Vic. I'm probably going to set 2 up pretty close to identical to each other. I think the aftermarket blade, get a super tight throat, get that thing really, really sharp, make sure the sole is really flat, and that's my smoother. That's my final guy. I would probably set a second one up pretty much the same, because that's kind of how I set up my 4 and 5. Those are my 2 go-to planes. And in essence, I kind of set them up the same, but as you're getting rid of snipe and mill marks and stuff in wood, it'll take a few passes to get down to flat. And I find that if you use your smoothing plane for that, it kind of puts a lot of wear and tear on that. So the idea of getting 2 set up the same, one you're going to kind of use to kind of get everything down to basically flat. So it isn't like a heavy camber. You're not removing a lot of stock. You're just kind of truing up the machine marks from that board. And then you pull out your smoother and do 1 or 2 passes just to get the frosting on the cake. So a lot of times I'll set up my 4 and 5 exactly the same way. And then as I start to use one more than the other, one becomes the smoothing plane, the other one becomes the roughing plane until they both become the roughing plane. And then I need to sharpen both again and kind of go back to scratch. So I think it's really good to have, it's a nice luxury to have 2 set up, and the other 2, actually, and I'm not saying this, sarcastically, but it's really good to have an MDF plane around. Something, if you're truing up jigs and that kind of stuff, hand planes are a really good way to do it. And you take amazing shavings on MDF with a hand plane. But
oh, yeah.
I've got a number 4 and I know what to do with it now.
Yeah, it's your sheet good plane.
And it's going to get beat up, but guess what? You don't need a razor sharp edge to take good shavings on MDF or plywood. And it's good to have that little beater around for that kind of stuff. There you go.
I am so excited.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. Like the smoothing plane to me is like, it's like a 150-year-old random orbital sander, right? So like I wouldn't use a random orbital sander to remove snipe marks, because you'd end up with a disaster on your hands.
Exactly.
So
right.
I mean, if you set up your jack to do that sort of work, and then like the smoothers are your polishers, those are like, it's like block planes too, right? It's good to have 2 block planes.
Yes.
It's good to have one that is set up to like shave the hair off a gnat's butt.
Yep.
But then also have one like we're talking about, have the one that you use to fair out templates or whatever, made out of Baltic birch or what have you. So, I mean, having a coarse tool and having a fine tool, I mean, that's a good way to separate them out.
Yeah. And if you got them, go for it. To say, oh, go buy 2 Lee Nielsen number 4 bronze smoothers, it's like, oh, it's tough. But, if you have a Stanley and then you upgrade to a Veritas or Lee Nielsen, don't throw the Stanley away. You can get that set up for something else.
I agree 100%.
All right. Well, we'll end with some listener comments. This one is from XJumper65. This is a great woodworking podcast from the writers and editors of the finest woodworking magazine I've ever read.
Right on.
Wow.
The content is entertaining and informative. The hosts and occasional guest hosts are a pleasure to listen to. Tom, Ben, and Mike, along with the occasional ray of sunshine known as Anissa Capsalis.
Yeah, but too much sun is not good.
So. And my favorite iTunes comment of all times, these 5-star reviews, which we all appreciate. This is my favorite, from Baby Hippo Dan. It's no cereal, but great woodworking podcast though. So, all right.
No cereal, but nobody gets hurt. So, got that going for us.
Anybody have any random recommendations? Instagram accounts? Oh, Barbie. What is it? Barbie Woodworking?
That would
That's
be
all the rage right now.
Yeah, because she uses blue tape on her ducktails. And there's a copy of my book in her shop, so that's pretty awesome.
That's an astounding account.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So basically, it's kind of stop motion Barbie doll, or I guess it's not. They're just someone off camera is moving a Barbie doll around, and she's making things out of wood and cutting some really nice dovetails.
I'm blown away by their ability to woodwork at such a fine scale, because if you think about how small the pieces are to be scaled to a Barbie doll, it's insane.
Yeah, it's a father-daughter team who's putting that together.
Yeah.
It's super cool. Really, really cool.
Yeah, I think it's a father-daughter team with a joke that got a little out of hand or something.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I'll have to check that out.
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
No? All right. And right at that very moment, my microphone started to freak out as I read the outro copy. So that's all for this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you have questions you'd like us to answer on the show, send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that thumbs up button. Thank you to our sponsors for keeping this train rolling. Thanks again to Jeff Rose for keeping this train rolling, really. And we'll be back next week with a bonus episode.